Hi, my name is Mariana Restrepo. I'm the deputy editor of Buddhadharma. Here with me today is Carlo Carranza, who's a dedicated practitioner and teacher with over 24 years of experience in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Carlo's journey began in 2001 when he encountered the teachings of Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche while studying at the University of British Columbia. This experience led him to ordain as a monk, and he received monastic vows from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, which he held for over a decade. Since 2012, Carlo has served as an instructor with Siddhartha's intent, bringing Buddhism to a broader audience. He also plays an active role in Khyentse Foundation's Milinta program for Western instructors and is a member of Siddhartha's Intent in Mexico and the United States. Hola, Carlo, bienvenido. Thank you for being here with us today.
Hello, Mariana and everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Well, I think we're just gonna dig right in. And so can you share your personal journey with Buddhism and how it intersects with your Latino cultural heritage? And perhaps you can also tell us about what aspects of Buddhism you think resonate most strongly with Latino practitioners, their values, and why.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned it, my journey started some years ago. I at a very young age. So growing up as a Latino, I always was a person in general. I always had big questions in life of like, why do we suffer? Can we truly be happy? Because we face different circumstances and experiences around our lives. So what happened after that? What happens after that? After we die. So I try to find answers in different places, but nothing really clicked on me. I'm not saying that other spiritual paths or explanations or philosophies were wrong, but they just didn't feel like they were answering what I needed. So then I found Buddhism. It happened that I went to a talk at my university about the Four Noble Truths given by a good friend and a professor. Now he teaches at Nitarta, and his name is Israel. And I started reading more about it, and everything made sense. So not long after, I moved to Canada, as you mentioned it, to continue my studies at the UBC. And I met my teacher, Dzongzar Khyentse Rinpoche, and an American nun who was there. She already passed away, Anilodro Palmo. And when I met Rinpoche, I right away knew that he was my teacher and that Buddhism was my path. So I was only 19 at that time, and it felt so true. Although I have had many teachers, he's my main master. And then when I was 23, after finishing my studies and working for a few years in an American company in Mexico, I decided to become a monk. I ordained by, as you mentioned it, by the 14th Dalai Lama, and had the opportunity to study the 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism and the Theravada as well, a little bit. Well, now being Latino, I often think about how Buddhism connects with our cultural background. Not just Latino, but also Westerners. Growing up in a Western culture, in a Latino family, where we taught that we taught about the importance of relationships, friendship, respect, community. So those values reach or really match, would be the word, really match what Buddhism teaches about interdependence, compassion, helping others. Buddhism also, I think, gave me a way to deal with life's challenges more calmly, more wisely, which is something that I think will help anyone, no matter what background they come from.
Right. And so you have been teaching, in Siddhartha's Intent. So you have experience teaching a lot of students from different backgrounds. So you teach in the United States and you teach in Mexico. So in that experience, what are ways that you have seen, either Latino or Western practitioners maybe interpreting or practicing Buddhism differently from traditional approaches?
Yeah, well, first of all, as my teacher says, for Buddhism, we have an obstacle called culture.
Mm.
And you and me, for instance, we ended up dressing like Tibetans in order to learn and practice Buddhism.
True.
But it could be useful. But culture, although it's necessarily, is not Buddhism. Culture is like the container to hold the message of Buddhism. So we could take advantage of it and carefully adapt it or transform it. And I will talk a little bit about it. So regarding Buddhism within the let's say within the Latino community, I think there are two scenarios that I've seen, and I think it's important to address both. The first scenario is when people try to contrast, or probably a fancy word will be juxtapose or combine
Mhm.
our traditional religious background or practices with Buddhism. So I'm not criticizing this approach, but that can be sometimes confusing as the way the views are presented are different and they can be mixed. For example, you may see someone replace the image of the Virgin Mary with Tara or God with Buddha, thinking that they are practicing Buddhism in this way. And this can lead to a misunderstanding. It's tricky because it can lead to a misunderstanding because the views behind them are very different. Buddhism teaches a specific view of reality. We live in a completely interdependent scenario. So if you don't take the time to really understand that, you may end up blending traditions in a way that doesn't give you clarity.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's important to learn how to differentiate the local cultural practices from the actual Buddhist teachings and
Mm.
application. And then the second scenario that I've seen is when someone tries to integrate the Buddhist view while still embracing their cultural practices. This is where I've seen more success. Let's say there's nothing wrong to have a Christmas tree during Christmas and being Buddhist and celebrate Christmas. For example, a person might bring the values of family, community, devotion, which are strong in the Latino culture, into their Buddhist practice, and they don't abandon their cultures or their roots, you can say it, but instead they can bring their cultural heritage into their practice in a way that supports their path to wisdom and compassion. This also allows them to maintain their cultural backgrounds while deeply engaging in the Buddhist teachings. That in this way, Buddhism becomes a real tool for transformation.
Right. So here, what I'm hearing is there's a difference between like the content and the form. Like in one scenario, like what it might look Buddhist, like maybe Tara instead of the Virgin Mary. When people are practicing it, they're still kind of focusing on a different concept, not really specifically or clearly the Buddhist concept of Tara is kind of replacing that image. And then on the other hand, we can continue to practice the actual, the practices, the wisdom of Buddhism, while also having a different kind of form that is manifesting. So did I get that right?
Yeah, I think as long as we don't as we don't get confused with the views of
Right.
reality.
So the
I think,
form and the view, yeah. So the view,
yeah,
well, you maintain the view, and then externally it may manifest differently, but we cannot confuse the view with the form. All right,
exactly.
great.
Exactly.
So, do you believe that Buddhism needs to be adapted in any way to be meaningful for other communities, whether Latino or Western communities? And if so, how do we adapt it?
Actually, that's a very good question. Because personally, that's what I've heard from my teachers too, I don't think Buddhism needs to be adapted in the sense of changing the core teachings,
Right.
because the view is universal and timeless.
Mm.
The concepts like impermanence and the nature of reality, are as true for people in the West as they are in Asia, as in modern times, as in the times of the Buddha. There are universal truths
Mm.
that don't change based on the cultural geography. Having said that, however, you know, what does need to be adapted is how Buddhism is presented.
Mhm.
I think the way we communicate the teachings can make them more accessible and meaningful um, to people from different cultural backgrounds. For example, in the Latino community or other Western cultures, we may relate to different metaphors, language, or even certain practices. So the core teaching should remain like this, intact. We can say intact because they have never. I mean, permanence has always been there, but the delivery can be adjusted to connect more deeply with the people's life experiences, values, ways of thinking. So I think that's an important point. By presenting Buddhism in a way that acknowledges and incorporates some local values, it can feel more kind of real, well, with the word like meaningful.
Right.
No, but again, the essence of the teachings, our potential, or Buddha nature, no, the view of interdependence, the Four Noble Truths, the path to liberation, it doesn't need to be. I mean, we don't need to change them. It's
Mhm.
more about how we convey these teachings in a cultural relevant way that it speaks to the heart of the community.
Right. So that leads me to the next question. In your experience, can you share any examples of this being done? Forms of practices that maybe blend with the local culture traditions to make Buddhism feel more of a lived cultural experience.
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of examples and how new forms of practice can be developed. But first, I think when considering if Buddhism needs to be adapted for the Western or the Latino communities, it is important to emphasize the role of a qualified teacher to
Mhm.
start with. In Buddhism, having a teacher is essential. Teacher, I mean, teacher means guide, a guide, for proper guidance of the path. Something that can be overlooked in modern adaptations. While books and online resources are helpful, they cannot replace the personal guidance of an experienced master. So finding a qualified master can be challenging, but it's crucial for understanding the Dharma and for do this adaptation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
So now to effectively integrate Buddhism into local cultures, there are several key elements that we can find even in the teachings that need to be considered. My teacher, Songsar Khyentse Rinpoche, often emphasized some of them. Now, first and foremost, it is essential to ensure that the teachings are translated and truly understood and felt by the local community. I mean, so to say it. Language in this case, as part of the relative truth, the language plays a crucial role in this process. So without the teachings and practices available in local languages, it becomes difficult for people to truly connect with the Dharma in a way that like resonates with their lives and culture. So Rinpoche says, it's about making the teachings alive and accessible,
Mhm.
which starts with clear communication in the local community.
Right.
Another vital aspect is the establishment of local communities, not just monastic, but also lay communities. Of course, the presence of local monastics, both female or male, as part of the Mahasangha or the great community, is important to Buddhism to take root in a place. When local people, either monastics or lay practitioners, are able to offer teachings, lead prayers, and embody the path of
Mhm.
the Buddha, they become, like I say, like a living example of practitioners that that you can relate with the deeper aspects of the Dharma. So, well, I can give you some other examples that I found in.
Sure,
Yes.
that'll be great.
Yeah, yeah, they are inspiring for me at least.
Yes.
How Buddhist prayers and rituals have been adapted to local local languages and musical local traditions. Then we have the Theravada tradition in places like there's a monastery in Australia that is called Buddha Bodhivana, I think, and they have successfully integrated the local chants,
Mm.
prayers, the pujas. No, there's another one called the Dhamma Vihara in Mexico. They incorporate the teachings and practices into local cultural expressions while keeping the Buddhist message. Yeah, for instance, in the Tibetan tradition, there are beautiful chant mixes, including the 21 praises to Tara in English, Spanish, or even a choir version of the seven lamp prayers to Padmasambhava. That could be in English, and similarly in Spanish. The Spanish speaking communities, that are adaptations of the mandala offering within mariachi in Mexico, mariachi music, or the seven light prayers to Padmasambhava, following your fellow Colombians vallenato style. um, have made these practices more accessible, and many people find it easier to connect with these prayers in their own languages and cultural context, along with them to experience the teachings more deeply. I'm also seeing how technology, the teachings can be presented into different audiences. I recently was talking to an old friend, Lama Rinchen, who has been working a lot to bring the Dharma into the Latino community in a very successful way in Spanish, and with very clear explanations of the Buddhist concepts and practices. So such adaptations that, when done with understanding and respect the teachings, Buddhism can naturally integrate into local cultures, making both meaningful and relevant for new
Yes,
and
yeah. And you mentioned the Vaginato, seven line prayer, which I listen to, and perhaps we can figure out how to link it so people, if they want to, listen to it, they can. But when I listen to that, it's like, listening to something that is very much Colombian, like what to me means, to Colombians mean to be a Colombian, and then hearing that be, praise to Guru Rinpoche. So it's kind of like those two things coming together. And it does give you a sense of like, of ownership, of pride, like this is like now part of me and my tradition. So I think, yeah, I think those things are really important to like make practitioners feel like they're not just doing some foreign thing that they can't really quite understand or relate to, but like make it their own and make it part of like their lived experience. So those are really great examples. Thank you for sharing. So I'm also wondering if there, perhaps other rituals that are not Buddhist, part of Latino culture, that maybe you feel that they harmonize with Buddhist principles. I know recently you gave a talk on the Day of the Dead celebration from a Buddhist perspective. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Sure, there are many examples again of local practices that can be integrated into our Buddhist path. As you mentioned it recently, we had an event that explored the Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead celebration, from a Buddhist perspective. So probably we can add in the interview some of the images that you
Sure.
mentioned, and with the poster that is the Buddha with the different in a Mexican altar. So yes, we did a meditation on impermanence based on the great Tibetan teacher Tsongkhapa, with short daily instructions, and we engaged in a light offering practices and using the prayers of Mipan Rinpoche, and people really love it, And another idea we could promote, I think, is the concept of a Buddha that is not a traditional concept, but the concept of a Buddhist wedding ceremonies. See, well, traditionally Buddhists don't have a specific wedding rituals. Some teachers, like the late Charan Trungpa, like say, or the late Lama Yeshe, have come down to have done this in the past. And nowadays, teachers like mine and others perform blessing ceremonies for successful marriages, focusing on the benefit of all, emphasizing the practice of the six paramitas or perfections. Let's say for my own wedding, we had a mix of Latino Asian traditions, and we had 6 tables named after each of these 6 perfections. And it was a huge hit with our guests, So that are some things, that we can do.
Great. Yeah. And so, I mean, I guess thinking, Buddhism in the West, still in its early stages, relatively to like history, right? So what are small practical steps that you can, or advice that you can give to local Buddhist centers or, Buddhist teachers that they can implement to make Buddhism more accessible and relevant to, Westerners or, Latino practitioners specifically?
Mhm. Well, I'm sure they have thought a lot about this. Many of the local Buddhist centers and all over the world, all over the place. Um, I think first of all, it is important to offer activities uh, in the local languages. That will help a lot, and that will make people, as we mentioned, it to relate with their or a language that they can understand. If you speak Tibetan perfectly, the Tibetan's already done all the job of adaptation. But if you don't, then to go and sit down there for an hour saying things in Tibetan, it could be kind of, I mean, not very. I mean, you could like it probably one time or a second time, but all the time, sometimes could be difficult. So also, I think it is important to offer more activities for beginners or even non-Buddhists. No, many groups or centers provide activities designed to formal practitioners, which is great. Yeah? But they often don't provide any basic and short things to the general public. As a result, when we visit, they primarily encounter an exotic and religious aspects of Buddhism. While this can be appealing to some, but for younger generations, offering basic practices combined with social gatherings could be highly successful. People enjoy, in general, social interactions, and blending the practice with community events could make Buddhism more accessible and encouraging for a wider audience. That would be one. I've seen some of the centers, like the Sakya Center, Sakya Monastery in Seattle, organize events such as camping trips
Oh, okay.
or bringing food to social work, bringing food and social work at shelters. I've seen Abhikirta Vajra Rinpoche leading these activities, which they are truly wonderful. To reach the schools. I know there will be another thing, to reach the schools, to provide simple instructions for children. It is important for their education to learn how to know about their basic goodness, about their minds. Prisons, are other field where Buddhists can teach, can be and can be extremely useful. I used to visit several prisons in the past to provide some basic meditation instructions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Those are great points. Because yeah, I remember I used to go to a Buddhist center when I first started, my journey into Buddhism. And it was kind of like the introduction to meditation, but then, the teacher will be reading from like a very like wasn't so much a like introductory book. It was like an advanced book. And I remember, for example, one time they were reading about the description of the different realms. And then someone walked in and it was their first time ever at a Buddhist center. And then then he was just like listening to like this very kind of like exotic description of like what all the different realms like heavens and hells look like. So that person never came back, right? So yeah, I think that's a great point that like offering things that are not Buddhist specific but that are kind of teaching, communicating the view in a broader way to a broader audience. I think that is really helpful. So thank you for that. And I guess finally, one last question. Recently, you wrote an excellent article for Buddhadharma about the preliminaries of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, or the Nöndro. And so I'm just curious to see what you think about how this practice, the Nöndro practice, has been adapted to Westerners, or if and how it could be further adapted to this new audience.
Okay. I think before this question, I would like to share with you a story.
Okay.
What you just said about entering to a Buddhist center and listen about immediately start listening about the six realms of existence. Um, for for instance, Latinos will love this topic. I don't know why. People love the six realms of existence because they talk about ghosts and about the heavens and about hells and about the and then um, let's say an example of the six realms, the realm what we call the hell realm, that really in Sanskrit means naraka or narak. That means difficult to get out of. That's the translation. So we translate it as hell, but I mean, it has totally different perspective culturally. Difficult to get out of, naraka. So I was talking to a teacher. I was translating one time, and I was talking to one of my teachers. He was a traditional, I mean, an old Tibetan teacher, and I told him, um, there will be a new audience this time. There are mostly beginners, so I will appreciate them. I want to warn you or to share with you this information because they don't know about Buddhism. Say, oh, great, thank you for telling me that. So I will start with something very basic. Okay. So we sat down, and then he started talking, and then obviously for him that was obvious. That was the most obvious and basic thing. He started saying, okay, well, now after cycling in samsara countless lives here. I mean, we countless lives, we are now meeting now due to this amount of merit that we have accumulated in the past and have gained this precious human life that is free from all this um, bad conditions and even all lower realms. So let's rejoice about it. And then people had no idea what he was talking about. But for him, that was obvious. That's so basic. And that relates us with the Nöndro. Okay, I think.
Yes.
Um, well, I must quote my own teacher, Chonsar Khyentse Rinpoche, when it comes to adapting practices such as the preliminary practices on so-called Nöndro, in Tibetan. I think it is essential to approach them with a proper understanding and clear guidance, because it will be like going to a high math class without knowing the basic math principles, subtraction, addition. If you go to a calculus class or to a high math class of algebra, it's not that it's forbidden for you and it's just for some very special beings. No, is that in order to understand this advanced math, you need to know the basic maths. Otherwise, you will enter the classroom and you will say, these people are crazy. Why are they talking? Right?
Right.
Well, advanced math is very, very serious and a very, very an excellent teaching. Just because you don't have the basis is that you cannot understand it. That's the reason why. So there are practices that are deeply rooted, these practices of Nöndro, that are deeply rooted in the Buddhist view, and it's crucial to maintain that core perspective when adapting from different cultural contexts. Nöndro, which includes practices like prostrations, refuge, mantra recitation, are not just, first of all, ritualistic tasks. They are a way to directly engage with the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. We try to adapt them without preserving their original meaning or purpose. We risk diluting this heart of the practice. No, Rinpoche has often emphasized that while cultural differences are important to consider, the teachings, as we mentioned, it must not be changed or compromised. The ultimate goal of the Nöndro is to cultivate a proper mindset, to purify the mind, and to develop compassion, wisdom, clarity. So therefore, if these practices are to be integrated into the Buddhist or Latina cultures, it is important that they are taught with accurate instructions that preserve their transformative potential. And my recommendation will be to use a liturgy that inspires you. Do it in a language that you can understand, or even record your own voice doing the practices. Use a song to recite the refuge prayer. Compose your own prayer to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and do it at any time during your meditation session or after. While visiting a place, you can offer as many mandalas as you want, or recite the Vajrasattva mantra. The practice that should be presented in a way that resonates with local culture, but don't forget about their original intent. Now, this approach ensures that practitioners, regardless their background, can benefit from them without misunderstanding or just oversimplifying the teachings.
Right. And again, something that you already said, that you emphasize a lot is the importance of a teacher and always have that guidance from a teacher. So even, so something that's foundational, I think is even more important to have that guidance to make sure that you start, from the beginning with the right view and the right understanding of the practices. Yeah. Well,
Yes.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Muchas gracias. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much. And hopefully we can do this again some other time.
Sure, Mariana. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for all your team. And I hope to have the opportunity to meet with you soon again.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.